All right, welcome back to the second portion, I believe, of the um, lecture preview for bone tissue. Um, I think where we left off in the first lecture was talking about the histology of bone. Bone being the basic organization of bone is organized in something called an osteon, and osteon is going to change shape in responses to the physical demands placed on the skeleton. Again, for our purposes, I just want you to know that the osteon is the basic um, functional unit of bone tissue. Um, we went over the organizations, talking about the concentric lamellae within the lecture. These are like the rings on a tree trunk. And then with the inside of those lamellae are going to be something called lacunae. Lacunae are going to have those osteocytes. We know that the caniculae are going to have these blood vessels that are going to supply the osteocytes. In class, we talked about a little bit about the histology of bone tissue. So, spongy bone lacks osteons, and lamellae are arranged in a lattice of thin columns called trabeculae. Okay, this differs right from our compact bone that we've talked about. Um, I talked a little bit about blood and nerve supply, and I said probably the most important things for you guys to know that there is blood that supplies the bone, which is important, right? If we have damage to these vessels, we could potentially have damage to the osteocytes, which are going to be our mature bone cells. So the periosteal arteries will bring in uh, bring blood the um, to the bone, and the epiphyseal veins will carry it away. But again, I don't think it's important for you guys to memorize these things right now. So spongy bone within each trabeculae or lacunae that contain these osteocytes, and we said this trabeculae is unique to this spongy bone. So osteocytes are nourished from the blood circulating through the trabeculae. Um, Here, I showed you the different portions, the epiphysis being the head of the bone, the metaphysis being the middle portion. And this is going to be the area that has the richest blood supply. We talked about osteomyelitis and how it usually occurs within the metaphysis, especially within children. And I talked to you guys about um, being due to this rich blood supply that was present within the metaphysis. What I do think is important for you guys to know is talking about bone formation. We said this occurs through a process called ossification. Okay, ossification. It can occur in four different situations, and these are kind of intuitive. The formation of bones within embryo, all right? Growth of the bone until adulthood, remodeling of the bone, making the bone stronger, and then repair of fractures. So, bone formation of bone in an embryo occurs through cartilage formation and ossification during the 6th week of embryonic development. So here you can see the bones of the mandible and the flat bones again. This is going to be due to intramembranous ossification, right? Whereas endochondral ossification is going to be the replacement of this cartilage through bone, okay? So this is going to be two important points that I want you to know. Flat bones of the skull and mandible are formed in this way. We talked about soft spots. Remember soft spots being the fontanelle that helps the fetal skull pass through the birth canal. These become ossified, forming the skull. Okay. Usually you will have complete ossification of the skull by a year old. You'll see loss of that soft spot. Endochondral ossification is going to be the replacement of cartilage by bone. So most bones of the body are formed in this way, including the long bones. And we said examples of the long bones would be the humerus and the femur. Again, I think it would be important for you to know the different types of ossification, knowing that ossification is the formation of bone, and knowing that there's intramembranous and there's endochondral. Intramembranous is going to be how the flat bones of the skull form and how the mandible forms. And again, we talked about soft spots. We talked about how this was important for childbirth, right? For the baby to be able to pass through the womb. And we talked about endochondral ossification, how this was going to be important for long bone growth. Here is just a picture that's showing you the cartilage model, development of this cartilage model. You have growth and then development of a primary ossification center here. And then eventually we develop this medullary cavity, which is going to contain the blood supply. So this is what I think is important: growth and length. We talked about children growing, and we talked about the growth plate. We said that if you guys remember during the lecture, I talked about how my niece, how my niece had a scoliotic curve, and how she had went to the doctor, and the doctor said, "Well, good news. It doesn't look like the scoliotic curve. Your scoliosis is going to get any worse because you're almost done growing." And I said, "How did he, know that she was almost done growing?" And he looked at X-ray imaging, and he could tell by her growth plate whether it was open or closed. So the growth and length of long bones involves two major events, and I think it would be important for you to know about where this occurs and what's happening. So growth of cartilage on the epiphyseal plate. Again, epiphyseal plate is just another word for the growth plate. And then you have replacement of this cartilage by bone tissue in the epiphyseal plate. So this is what's happening whenever you're growing, right? You have uh, increase in growth of this cartilage on the epiphyseal plate, and eventually it becomes replaced by um, bone tissue in the epiphyseal plate. So this is a picture here at the humerus of the epiphyseal plate, this being the growth plate. Depending on how big or how little, you can tell whether they're going to have much more growth, right? Um, okay, osteoclast. We talked about the osteoblast being important for increasing bone growth, right? B for bone. The osteoclast, I said that this was important to know that this is where bone resorption, or the tearing down of bone, occurs. This is how it happens. So this dissolves the calcified cartilage, and the osteoblasts invade the area, laying down bone matrix. So again, I said osteoclast will remove the calcium off, and then the osteoblasts will take it, and they will recalcify the bone, right, making it stronger. This is called bone remodeling. You've got constant activity of osteoblasts and osteoclasts. They have to work together in order for proper bone growth to occur. Remember, if the osteoblast will grow too or lay down too much bone, we'll have this thick, porous bone, and if the osteoclast remove too much calcium, then we'll have this brittle bone. So they have to be working together. So the activity of the epiphyseal plate is the way bone can increase in length. At adulthood, the epiphyseal plates close and bone replaces all the cartilage, leaving a bony structure called the epiphyseal line. So if you see an epiphyseal line, you should know that the person is close to being an adult. Okay, this is closure of the growth plate. Here is a picture of an epiphysis. So again, the epiphysis being the head of the bone. There are here's where the epiphyseal growth plate is occurring. Right here, you're having a resting zone of cartilage proliferating, a hypertrophic cartilage, and a zone of calcified cartilage. So eventually, the chondrocytes, which are the basic cartilage cells, will be replaced by bone. This is how you have an increase in growth. Okay, so talking about the how bone is continuing to grow, you have a growth in thickness. Bones grow in thickness at the outer surface, or they also remodeling of bone. Okay, the ongoing replacement of old bone tissue by new bone tissue, and we said it's through the activity of the osteoblasts and the osteoclasts. The osteoclasts will resorb the bone, which means just remove it, and the osteoblasts will lay down this new bone. And we talk about this. A balance must exist between the actions of the osteoclast and the osteoblast. If too much new tissue is formed, the bones become abnormally thick and heavy. This will be too much osteoblast activity. Excessive loss of calcium weakens the bone, as occurs in osteoporosis. And I told you guys to write down vitamin D is needed for calcium production. Okay, vitamin D is needed for calcium production. And I said that too little calcium equals osteoporosis. I'm going to repeat that again. So we need vitamin D in order to form calcium or absorb calcium, right? In the case of osteoporosis, which is just excessive loss of calcium or excessive reabsorption of bone, this is causes a weakening of the bone. Okay. Also wanted you to know that vitamin D deficiency results in osteomalacia. Okay, osteomalacia or rickets. Okay, rickets is going to be a disease that we talked about in childhood. I showed you guys this picture here of rickets. Show it to you again. Rickets. Rickets, they develop bowing of the legs right here. You'll see a child with rickets here. They develop this bowing. It's just due to the fact that they have low vitamin D, which results in low calcium, which results in the weakening of the bone. You can see here back on this definition, rickets is the softening and weakening of the bones in children, usually because of an extreme and prolonged vitamin D deficiency. Cool. So, factors affecting bone growth and bone remodeling. Again, we talked about vitamins. I said the main minerals I wanted you to know was calcium and phosphorus. Okay, calcium and phosphorus. I did mention in class about fluoride being present within toothpaste, and ask you guys why. And it's because fluoride is responsible for maintaining the normal texture of the teeth, right? Maintaining the architecture, like the structure of the teeth. It helped with um, uh, maintaining the integrity. Vitamins, there's A, C, and D, vitamin K and vitamin B12. Um, are they all important? Yes. Which ones am I specifically going to pick out for you guys? Vitamin D. Vitamin D helps build bone by increasing the absorption of calcium from foods in the gastrointestinal tract into the blood. So I want you to know that vitamin D helps absorb calcium from foods in the GI tract, right? So vitamin D, where do we get vitamin D? We get it from the sun. That's one way, right? Can also get it through dairy products. And I asked you guys what dairy products were, and you guys told me that it was our milks and our cheeses, things like that, yogurt, things like that. Vitamin C is needed for the synthesis of collagen, right? Collagen is also going to be an important component of bone growth, right? Collagen, bone is made up of type 1 collagen. It's the strongest of the collagen types. There's 4 different types. Vitamin C is needed for the synthesis of collagen. And I said vitamin C deficiency. If you remember, if you had me for Bio 112, I told you there was a disease that resulted from vitamin C deficiency, and I wanted you to know this, and it was called scurvy. A disease caused by deficiency of vitamin C characterized by swollen, bleeding gums and the opening of previously healed wounds. Scurvy. Scurvy. Right? Affects gums quite a bit and have problems with wound healing and things like that. Okay. What else is important? Hormones. We're going to talk about different hormones. These hormones are important, but they're not the ones that I'm going to test you on, right? They're very important for the growth of bone, right? Thyroid hormone. There's a disease called uh, congenital thyroid deficiency now. It was previously called cretinism. It's because the babies didn't have enough thyroid hormone, therefore they looked like this. Cretinism. Right? Thyroid hormones needed, right? If moms are deficient in thyroid, then their babies would have become deficient in thyroid. Insulin is also needed. Insulin promotes bone growth by increasing the synthesis of bone proteins. Growth factors, if you have a deficiency in human growth hormone, then you develop something called dwarfism, right? So growth factor stimulates osteoblasts, promotes cell division at the epiphyseal plate. These are the ones that are important. I want you to know estrogen, parathyroid hormone, calcitrol, and calcitonin. Okay. So estrogen and testosterone are going to be what's responsible for the sudden growth spurt that occurs during the teenage years. I want you to know that. So estrogen, testosterone equals growth spurt. This is going to promote changes in the female pelvis and shuts down growth at the epiphyseal plate. This is why I told you that if kids go through puberty too early on, that they can that their bone growth can be stunted, right? Parathyroid hormone is going to increase the calcium in the blood. It's going to take calcium from the bone, right? It's going to activate the osteoclast in order to resorb bone calcium. Okay, calcitrol is going to be the activated form of vitamin D. It's going to be present in the kidneys. And calcitonin is going to tone down the calcium within the blood Therefore, it's going to um, add the calcium back onto the bone. And we'll discuss that in more detail. Then there was fracture types. There was a bunch of different fracture types, and I said there was a few different fractures that I wanted you guys to know. I said that open and closed fractures would be fair game to test because they're very simple, right? An open fracture means the bone protruded through the skin. It's open. The skin has open, right? This is an open compound fracture. Or there's a simple closed fracture in which it does not break the skin. So depending on whether the skin is broken by the bone will determine whether it's open or closed. I also said I wanted you to know the green stick fracture. A green stick fracture is a partial fracture in which one side of the bone is broken and the other side bends. So I showed you guys with the stick, if only one side of the bone was broken, but the other side was just bent, what it would look like. Then there's stress fracture. It's just a series of microscopic fissures in the bone, right? These are hard to detect sometimes. Here's a green stick fracture. You can see here, this is the fracture. And you can see that one of the bones here is it's just broken. It's one side's broke, but the other side's fine. It's a green stick fracture. Then I said I wanted you to know how bone likes to heal. Right, this is fracture and repair. I told you about the kids in uh, that practice Muay Thai, maybe in Thailand, how they kick the trees and they induce these series of microfractures in order for the bone to heal back extra strong, so that they would have really strong legs whenever they fought. So there's formation of a fracture hematoma, right? But the most important thing is bone remodeling, right? Bone remodeling is going to be the final step in um, fracture repair. Okay, you form this fracture hematoma, which is basically just this collection of blood, right? A blood. It's basically like a bone. It's like a bruise on the bone. Then there's fibrocartilaginous callus formation. Cartilage forms, then it becomes replaced by bone, and then eventually bone remodeling is the final stage. Complex bone replaces this spongy bone. Here's a picture of how this occurs. You have this formation, this fracture hematoma, which is present here. Then you're having the fibroblasts move in and begin to repair by laying down this collagen, this fibrocartilaginous callus formation, and then eventually the osteoblast will lay down the bone and callus. It's also important to know, and again, I think this is pretty self explanatory, but bone is the body's major calcium reserve. This is why it's very important for you to take in sufficient amounts of vitamin D and calcium in order for bone growth to occur and to prevent bone breakdown, right? So, calcium is needed for a bunch of different things. It's part of blood clotting, but what you guys will learn in the next is it's in the next muscle lecture, it's both nerve and muscles depend on calcium. So calcium is going to be the major ion that's responsible for muscular contraction. So if we don't have a sufficient amount of this calcium within our bones in order to serve as a reserve, or reservoir, we're not going to have the ability for muscular contraction. That's called tetany, whenever the muscle just remains contracted and doesn't relax, right? So I told you that parathyroid hormone would be important, and I want you to know this. Parathyroid hormone regulates calcium exchange between the blood and bone tissue. So, parathyroid hormone is a hormone that is going to do a bunch of different things that you're going to learn about in anatomy and physiology too, if you go that far. All right, it's going to regulate the calcium between the blood and the bone. It's going to work to increase the osteoclast activity. And what do we say osteoclasts were responsible for doing? Bone resorption, right? So parathyroid hormone increases osteoclast activity. It's going to remove calcium from the bone into the blood. I'm going to say that again because this is important. This is a test point. Parathyroid hormone is going to regulate the exchange of calcium between the blood and the bone, right? How does it do that? Parathyroid hormone increases the number of activity of the osteoclast. It activates the osteoclast to take calcium from the bone and into the blood. Cool. It also does some other things. It acts on the kidneys to decrease the loss of calcium, but I want you to know about it increasing osteoclast activity, and it also works to stimulate the formation of calcitrol, right? Calcitrol is going to be a hormone that promotes absorption of calcium from foods in the gastrointestinal tract. So I told you that vitamin D was responsible for absorbing calcium in the GI tract, right? The activated form of vitamin D is called calcitrol. So PTH, parathyroid hormone, activates calcitrol to um, promote absorption of calcium in the gut. So, two things parathyroid hormone does. One, it activates the osteoclast. It activates the osteoclast to increase calcium within the blood, right? And then two, it activates calcitrol. It activates calcitrol. What does calcitrol do? Calcitrol is responsible for absorbing calcium within the gut. Here's a picture here that I'll go over in the review session. I'm not going to kill you guys with this just right now. I know you guys are tired. Bones role in calcium homeostasis, actions that work to decrease blood calcium levels. So again, this is where this homeostasis between the osteoclast and the osteoblast come into. So parathyroid hormone is going to work to increase blood levels of calcium, and calcitonin works to tone down the calcium that is present in the blood. So what do I mean by tone down? I mean that it decreases blood calcium levels. So calcitonin inhibits the osteoclast activity. I'm going to say that again. Calcitonin works to tone down the blood calcium levels, and it does this by inhibiting osteoclast activity. The result is that calcitonin promotes bone formation and decreases blood calcium levels. So, as we're coming to a close, exercise and bone tissue. Exercise is good. This is actually going to be one of the ways that will prevent osteoporosis. We said that osteoporosis could be a condition due to deficiency in vitamin D as well as calcium, right? Causes brittleness or thinness of the bones. This occurs oftentimes with aging. Women will become deficient in estrogen once they stop having a menstrual cycle, right? We said that estrogen was important for increasing bone growth, right? So as you exercise, weight bearing exercise specifically, such as walking, running, lifting weights, these are all going to be things that increase bone formation and prevent bone breakdown. As you can see here, there are two principal effects of aging: loss of bone mass, right, and brittleness, right? Loss of bone mass occurs from the loss of calcium from the bone matrix. The loss of calcium from bone is one of the symptoms in osteoporosis. Brittleness, this results from a decreased rate of protein synthesis. Collagen fibers give bone its tensile strength. The loss of tensile strength causes the bones to become very brittle. And you can see here the brittleness of the bone, this very porous looking bone right here, all the different pores within inside of the bone. So that's going to conclude this portion of the lecture. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me again. Thank you for your time and attention.